Good morning, Jr5. How are you today? Let's start to explain our lesson today, lesson 2 in unit 3, which is called the environmental balance. Before we start with the environmental balance, we should know the definition of the ecosystem. All these figures like this and this figure represent natural area, represent the natural areas that contains some living organisms and some non-living things. Some living organisms and some non-living organisms. Each one of these natural areas is called ecosystem. It's called ecosystem. So the ecosystem, it's any natural area including living organisms such as plants, animals, and non-living things like water, soil, and air. So the ecosystem, what is the meaning of the ecosystem? It's any natural area including or contains living organisms and non-living things. Living organisms as plants or animals, and non-living things as water, soil, and air. So the component of the ecosystem is not living organisms and non-living things. Living organisms like plants, like animals, like fungus, like bacteria or algae, but the non-living things like water, soil, air, light, minerals, all of these are non-living things. So the components of the ecosystem is living organism like plants, fungi, algae, or animals, and non-living things like water, air, and soil. So we can classify the ecosystem in according to their sizes into 3 ecosystems or 3 types. Number 1, small ecosystem like an area of land or water pond. Type number 2, large ecosystem like forest or desert or ocean. And very large ecosystem like the universe. The universe that is considered the unified ecosystem. Like this is the galaxy or the universe. So we can classify the ecosystem into 3 types, which are small, large, and very large. So let's recap. What is the meaning of the ecosystem? It's any natural area including living organisms like this as plants or animals, and non-living things as water, soil, and air. So the components of the ecosystem are living organisms and non-living things. Living organisms like plants, like animals, like fungus, like bacteria or algae, but non-living things like water, air, and soil. So we can classify the ecosystem into three types according to their sizes, into small or large or very large. Small, like an area of land or water pond like this, it's a small ecosystem. But large ecosystem like forest or desert or ocean, but very large ecosystem like the universe. Okay? So, if there is an interaction among the environmental components, these interactions keeps the balance between the components of the ecosystem. So the environmental balance means it's the balance among the components of the ecosystem. The balance between the living organisms and the non-living things. Living organisms and non-living things. If there is a balance between the components of the ecosystem, so this balance is called the environmental balance. But these interactions keeps the balance among these components unless a disturbance arises as a result of many factors. So there are factors that harm the environmental balance. What are the factors that harm the environmental balance? They are natural changes or man interference. Natural changes or man interference. Natural changes like the changing in the natural conditions in the ecosystem. This changing causes disturbance that leads to disappearance of some organisms and appearance of other organisms, like the disappearance of dinosaurs. So this is natural changes. Natural changes. But the man interference, there are some human activities such as cutting down trees like this, or burning forests, or pollution the environment. These factors or these human activities harm the environmental balance, but there are man interference because the man made these activities. So these human activities lead to disturbance of the environmental balance or harm the environmental balance. So again, there are two factors harm the environmental balance. What are they? Natural changes or man interference. Natural changes like the changing in the natural conditions in the ecosystem that causes disturbance that leads to disappearance of some of organisms and appearance of other organisms, like the disappearance of dinosaurs. This is that natural changes. But the man interference like cutting down trees and burning forests and polluting the environment. So, if I ask you what happens cutting down trees, what happened when the man cutting down trees? So it will harm the environment. It will harm the environmental balance, or it leads to the disturbance of the environmental balance. And what are the factors that keep the environmental balance? There are some food relationships that help in keeping the environmental balance, such as predation and saprophytism. The predation, it's a food relationship that help in keep the environmental balance, maintain the environmental balance. And the saprophytism, it maintains the environmental balance or keep the environmental balance. How? The predation or the effect of the predation organizes the number of prey population, because in the predation relationship the predator prey the prey. So the predation relationship, it organizes the numbers of prey populations, because where the predators help the prey to get rid of weak or sick members. The predators praise the weak and sick members and let the strong ones reproduce, adding strong members to the population. So, if there will no predators in the ecosystem, the number of prey will increase, because the predators organize the number of prey. If I ask you, give reason, the predation relationship plays an important role in keeping the environmental balance or keeping the balance of the ecosystem. Why? Because the predation relationship organizes the number of prey population. Organizes the number of prey populations. But the second one, the effect of the saprophytism. Saprophytism, it's an relationship, food relationship, that keep the environmental balance. Why? Because the saprophytism getting rid of the dead bodies. You know that the saprophytism, it's a food relationship where the decomposers get their food by decomposing the dead bodies or the decayed remains of the food, the rotten food. So the saprophytism relationship help the environment or help the ecosystem to get rid of the dead bodies. If there will no saprophytes in the ecosystem, so the environmental balance will be disturbed, will be harmed. Why? Because the Earth's surface will be covered with the bodies of dead organisms. Because the saprophytism help the ecosystem to get rid of the dead bodies, because they get their food by decomposing the dead bodies. So if there will no saprophytes in the ecosystem, the environmental balance will be harmed. The Earth's surface will be covered with the bodies of dead organisms. Now, let's recap these points. The factors that keep the environmental balance. What are the factors that keep the environmental balance? There are some food relationships like predation and saprophytism. Predation, the effect of the predation organizes the number of prey. Predation organizes the number of prey. Why? Because the predators help the ecosystem to get rid of the weak or sick members and let the strong ones adding strong members to the population. So if there will no predators in the ecosystem, so the number of prey will increase. And the effect of the saprophytes or the saprophytism relationship help the ecosystem to get rid of the dead bodies. So if there will no saprophytes in the ecosystem, the Earth's surface will be covered with the bodies of dead organisms. Okay? So there are two factors harm the environmental balance, like natural changes and man interference. But there are two factors keep the environmental balance, like the predation and saprophytism. And there are two definitions. It's very, very important in this lesson. The ecosystem, what does it mean by the ecosystem? It's any natural area including living organisms and non-living organisms or non-living things. What is the environmental balance? It's the balance between the components of the ecosystem. Thank you, Junior 5. Goodbye.